awaiting the cross. Here goes Van Nistelrooy!
In this video, we are going to transform this Ruud Van Nistelrooy figure that was made in 2001 into something else. There were only two sculpts ever made, the one on the right in 2001 and the one on the left in 2006. But I'm gonna try to make the one on the right look better. Part 1 is figure prep. We gotta do all the dirty work here so we do less work at the end. We gotta use some tools, so first tool we're gonna use is wood carving tools. I like to use the curved head to remove any excess hair on the figure. And we also need some I've said this before, please be careful when using wood carving tools. Look at the amount of plastic hair that we have removed. So this is how it looks after removing all the hair. And now we need the figure of sacrifice. My plan is to transplant the head and use a bit of clay to remodel the pose. Let's move on to part 2, sculpting. We need epoxy clay, water and some shaping tools. How epoxy clay works is you combine part A and part B, let it marinate and bind, and then it's good to go after 5 minutes. After maybe 1 to 2 hours of curing time, it will start to harden. A tip for me is to use small bits of clay at a time. We don't want to waste all this clay because it can be quite expensive. I'll use a silicone shaping tool to blend the clay into the figure before using the best tool I have in my work cabinet, my fingers. When I think of Ruud Van Nistelrooy, I always picture him in his long sleeve, so that's what we'll be doing for the figure. We'll be extending the sleeves and also using clay to cover the base. I'll let the clay dry overnight. We'll be using super glue to bind the head onto the pose. And the last step of sculpting is to cover the neck gap and also sculpting the hair. I'll be using a needle sculpting tool for hair details. I don't have a particular method, but let me try to explain how I sculpt my hair. What I like to do is vary the length of my strokes and also vary the strength of my strokes. So sometimes I'll press in deeper, sometimes I press a bit lighter to create a more realistic looking hair texture. And my last tip is do not sculpt straight lines. Alright, unless your figure has straight hair, try not to sculpt straight lines. It just looks very unnatural. I like to sculpt different segments at a time, so I'll add different snakes of clay at a time to represent different segments, so it's easy for me to add the details onto the hair. And with that, sculpting is done. Here is an unnecessary panoramic shot of my work so far.
Wow. 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 Wow.
Let's move on to part 3, painting with paint. But first let me set up my DIY wet palette. I like to use a kitchen sponge, followed by water and then parchment paper, and that's how I create my wet palette. I always prime my figures. It always helps future layers of paint stick onto the figure, so please prime your figures. It took me 2 to 3 coats to prime the figure. Let's move on to using white to paint. I'm using clear decal paper, so I need the area to be painted white before applying decals. Next, I'm using a blend of beige and white to paint the skin tone. I'm using very thin layers to cover the areas of the skin. And this is how it looks after 1 coat of paint. It took me 3 coats of skin tone to get the desired outcome. And let's move on to painting some details on the face. I like to mix a blend of pink with my skin tone to paint the lips, areas under the eyes, or any areas that I feel need some shading. Remember, I'm using very thin coats again. Next is a weird tip. I like to mix blue with my skin tone to get the 5 o'clock shadow color. Don't knock it till you try it. It works for me all the time. Lastly, I'm going to use a new technique for painting the eyes. This figure does have quite small details for the eyes, so I'm using a new tool, a toothpick. I was a little scared using a toothpick, but the more I tried it, the more I got used to it. I might be using this technique more in the future. Alrighty, so let's move on to part 4, decals. I'm using Mr. Mark Softer. It's a solution that makes the surface sticky for decals to be applied on easily. Let me introduce you to my file of procrastination. This is a library of all the logos that I wanted to make for different figures, but I've never gotten the time to. They contain a lot of logos to figures that I will probably never ever make. Can you spot some that you're interested in? Do drop a comment on what you'd like to see in the future. After cutting all the decals, it is time for application. What we need is water. So what I like to do is I drop the decals one at a time into water, let it swim for maybe 20 to 30 seconds before removing the backing and applying the decals onto the figure. To remove any excess water, I like to use a paper towel. After all the logos have been applied, let's move on to the final part, painting with paint again. First up, I'll use black to cover the sleeves and neckline details and also the socks. Before using red paint to cover the jersey, followed by the same black to finish up all the little details on the kit. I'll paint the base with my favorite green color, followed by painting the hair details. I'm using a mixture of black and brown for the hair. For the eyebrows, I'm using very thin and short strokes to create a more realistic eyebrow texture. It took me maybe 2 to 3 coats to get full coverage on the eyebrow, and let's get ready for the final reveal. But before I do that, it is my time to encourage you to support me by liking this video and also subscribing if you like to. And without further ado, this is 24 years in the making, my version of Ruud Van Nistelrooy. Thank you once again for watching this video. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.